Welcome to the Introduction of iView to Ambulatory course. As we standardize, simplify, and optimize our EMR, new functionality will be used for charting the following clinical documentation in the ambulatory setting. Sections listed here, which are contained in ambulatory power forms, will now be documented in iView. A statement will appear in your power form directing you to document in iView. The purpose of this tutorial is to introduce you to this workflow. At the end of this course, you will be able to document peripheral IV, central line care insertion for IV documentation, incision wound abnormality, surgical drains and tubes. Customize iView. Understand workflow for peripheral IV. Start, discontinue, and inactivate dynamic group using the incision wound abnormality subband. Document using conditional logic. View IV results and flow sheets. Disclaimer. Canopy is regularly updated to include new features and provide additional information. The screen layout in the live environment may differ slightly from what is shown here and may include additional patient information. iView Overview. You begin your day by logging into Canopy. You will continue to manage your patients as you do today. However, there is a new documentation method utilizing iView for documentation of wounds and IV central line documentation. From the provider schedule or from your patient list, you will open the patient chart. From the menu, select Intake and Output iView. When you open iView, it will open to your default settings. There are three main sections within iView: the Navigator, the View pane, and the Filter window. The screen is displayed with the Navigator on the left and the View pane on the right. Navigator. The Navigator organizes information into bands, which are subdivided into sections. To select a band, simply click on the name of the band. Sections within a band can be expanded by clicking on the section name. Please note additional details may display for the selected time frame. Gray text do not have any documentation. Black checkmark indicates documentation. Red exclamation point indicates critical results. View pane. The View pane is where all of your documentation displays in either actual or interval timeframes. The date range bar at the top allows you to adjust the date-time range that you are viewing. Blue text indicates reference information. Filter window. This allows you to search iView for specific results using filtering options. By selecting the boxes, you can search for critical, high, low, abnormal, flag, and unauthenticated results. These results then display in the filter window and are highlighted in iView below. Ambulatory positions will default a band labeled ambulatory with peripheral IV, central line, incision wound abnormality, and surgical drains sections. Let's review the ways that you can customize iView for your login. Click the Customize View icon located in the documentation pane of iView. On the Customize tab, you can select sections to default open. Selected sections will automatically display in the documentation pane of iView. Select the default open checkbox for incision wound abnormality. Click OK to save your changes and close the dialog box. If you need to add documentation at a specific time, right-click on the time and select Insert Date Time. Next, adjust the time to the time needed and enter. The new time column will be inserted with your specific time. Before we move on to review the new functions within iView, let's review all of the right-click functions when hovered over a cell with documentation. View Result Details allows you to view who documented a specific result. Modify allows you to correct a value documented in error. You should only modify your own documentation and not documentation from another user. Unchart allows you to in-error documentation entered that should not be in the record. Again, you should only unchart documentation entered by you and not another user. Change Date Time allows you to update the date and time if entered incorrectly. Add Comment allows you to add a specific comment to a data point. Avoid adding comments for specific details located in other areas of the EMR. You have learned how to navigate iView and customize navigator bands. You are ready to chart documentation about the peripheral IV. Within the ambulatory band, click Peripheral IV. Click the Dynamic Group button. Define the labels with the following details: right, antecubital, 18 gauge, over the needle. Click OK to close the window and return to iView. The system displays the label for the dynamic group subsection. The label is displayed inside brackets until it is signed. Notice that the activity and site condition are conditional fields. The conditional logic decreases the amount of visible text until it is needed. When an option is selected for a conditional field, additional fields will display on the view pane for documentation. Next, you will document the insertion of the peripheral IV. For activity, select Insert New Site. For procedure result, select Dressing applied immediately, dressing dated, and insertion successful. For number of attempts, enter 1. For line status, document that the IV flushes easily and good blood return. Click Sign to save the peripheral IV dynamic group. Upon reassessing the peripheral IV site 30 minutes later, it is noticed that the site is bleeding, hot to touch, and pain mild to moderate. The phlebitis score is 3. Click in the cell for phlebitis score and using the IV site phlebitis criteria, grade the site as 3. Note, reference information is available for any word shown in blue text. To review the IV site phlebitis criteria score using the reference text, click on phlebitis score. To close the reference text window, click OK in the lower right corner. You would also want to document discontinuation as demonstrated here. Click Sign to save the site condition and the phlebitis score. You have documented the peripheral IV started for your patient. Note, central line iView documentation should be completed using the same format as above. Begin a dynamic group. Wound details must be documented in iView before completing the appropriate power form. This will allow wound documentation completed by clinical staff within the past 24 hours to pull into the respective ambulatory wound power forms. A smart template will display the iView documentation in the power form when the wound section is opened. This will allow for the complete documentation to display in the textural rendition once the power form is signed. Incision and wound documentation requires creating a dynamic group to display the documentation elements in iView. Let's begin a dynamic group and document in iView before we document on the power form. Once in a patient chart from the menu, click Intake and Output iView. Click the subband Incision Wound Abnormality. Click Add a Dynamic Group. In the Dynamic Group dialog box, define the label with the following details. Incision Wound Abnormality Laterality, left. Location description, anterior. Location, chest. Click OK to close the window and return to iView. The new Dynamic Group subsection is displayed. Double-click the time column for left anterior chest to open the column for documentation. For abnormality type, select Surgical. The rest of the details have been completed for you here. Note the conditional logic that is displayed as we document the abnormality type. Additional documentation elements appear based on your previous selection. This decreases the amount of visible text and displays specific text as needed. Click Sign. You have completed incision and wound documentation on your patient. Note: surgical drains and tubes iView documentation is completed following the same format as above. Discontinue and inactivate a dynamic group. Now that we have demonstrated the completion of your wound documentation, let us review the inactivation of a dynamic grouper. You can inactivate a dynamic group when the grouper is no longer applicable to the patient and the documentation is complete. For example, a wound is healed and further documentation of the wound is no longer required. Once in a patient chart from the menu, select the Intake and Output iView. Click the Incision Wound Abnormality subband. To inactivate the left posterior heel dynamic group, right-click the label Left Posterior Heel and click Inactivate. Note the inactive dynamic group is displayed with a gray background. Completing a power form. Now that you have completed the wound documentation in iView, you may proceed to the power form to complete your documentation. You would continue documenting the appropriate sections of the form for the patient. Here are examples of what your wound assessment sections would look like in your power forms. Note that a smart template will pull your documentation in from iView. The nursing staff should ensure that they have documented the wound assessment in iView before opening this section. The template will only pull the last documented results in the past 24 hours. Lesson Summary. You have completed this lesson and reviewed how to customize iView, understand workflow for peripheral IV, start, discontinue, and inactivate a dynamic group using the Incision Wound Abnormality subband, document using conditional logic, and view iView results and flowsheets. Please print your transcript from PeopleLink to show completion of this course. You will not receive a certificate at the end of this course. Please navigate back to PeopleLink to print your transcript.